Sergers are used to stitch the raw edges of clothing. You might see on most of your clothes, and honestly, they're wonderful machines. But if you've been shopping around, you might have noticed that they're pretty expensive too. So before getting one, you want to ask yourself, is it really worth it at this point in your sewing journey to get a serger? So I'm gonna walk you through the pros and the cons of getting this wonderful machine at home. Let's start with the first con that might make you reconsider buying a serger. So I think the main one, despite the high price, is that you don't actually need a serger to finish your clothes. And by that, I mean there are many ways to make some really nice edges to your clothing without using a serger. For example, this garment, I made it myself and I didn't have a serger at this point. I just finished all the edges by, varying stitches and finishes. So, but it's a little bit like a sewing machine. Technically, you don't need one to sew your clothes. You could hand sew everything by hand. It's just gonna take forever. Well, it's like that with the serger too. And it's why I finally bought one myself. Like, you can finish your clothes without one, but it takes forever. And for me, I reached a point where I was sewing enough that I was considering all this time as time wasted, that I could do something more interesting than finishing edges over and over. So if you're really patient and you're just starting and you're making pretty simple things like pillowcases and such, no, you don't need a serger. But if you make clothing or you're starting to, have fun with sewing and you want to make more, well, you're still not gonna need one necessarily, but you're gonna want one pretty soon and pretty hard. So that was the main con. Other than that, it's the pretty steep point of the prices of this machine. So the one I've seen in the store that are brand new, the cheaper one were like 400 Canadian dollars to 500, and there are some that are very more expensive than that because they can do like different things that this one can't. But I personally chose to avoid this, con to go with the second-hand machine. So I personally paid $55 for this machine. It works. It might need some readjustment, but I know a local shop that does it. You really have to look for specialty shops, so it might cost you another, $150 to $200 to get it all into shape. But you might not spend that money even. So these are things to consider if you're buying secondhand. But if money is not a problem for you and you've confirmed that you love sewing, you really should invest in this. It's gonna be worth your while. If not, you can continue without it. It's not a necessity, but I'd say put a little money aside and plan it for the future, because you're gonna end up wanting one if you continue to sew. We've done the cons, now let's do the pros of buying a serger. I think the main reason why you want to buy a serger is that it's gonna make finishing your garment so much faster. And by so much faster, I mean the skirt that I've shown earlier, it took me forever to do. Not because of cutting the panels or assembling and whatnot. No, just because finishing the edges, you have to finish them by hand. So it's like straight stitches times, 4 or 8 for each seam. Whereas with this, you just cut your panels, you serge your edges, and you're done. So not only it makes it faster, and this is like the second pro, it makes it so much easier. You just have to finish the edges of your panels and then you're done. You can sew them. Whereas with many of the techniques with the sewing machine to finish the edges, you have to take into account that it's gonna take more seam allowance and fabric than, you know, whatever that you're using. So for example, with this, if you finish your 2 edges, you just have to take into account your seam allowance when you sew. Whereas with the other one, if you double fold it, well, you have to think in advance about adding 1 seam allowance to your panel even before you begin. So you might have, you know, ill-fitting garments in the end that are too tight or too loose in some places, and this is especially true for beginner sewists when you barely can follow the patterns. If you have on top of that to adjust in advance for some, you know, specialty serger techniques, you don't want to do that. So it's faster and it's easier. Those are the 2 main points. By this point, I think you know my opinion about serger. So I'm gonna take one more good point to you to buy one, and then we can wrap this video. So the last one is that if you're ever sewn with knits or stretchy fabric without a serger, you know how painful that is. So the serger is especially equipped to deal with this kind of fabric and to help them, you know, stabilize them and make some professional edges. So I think that for this only, it makes the machine worth it. So thanks for watching. I hope it answered some questions. If you still have some, you can leave them in the comments and I'll check to answer for you. And I hope that you got some good tips from this video. Bye bye.